Welcome to What's New in WinForms for .NET 9. I'm Merrie McGaw, and I am the engineering manager for the Windows Forms team. And
my name is Klaus Loeffelmann, and I'm a senior developer on the WinForms team.
What we're going to do today is talk about WinForms in .NET 9 and our thoughts about moving forward in this modern age. So we'll start with a little bit about, well, why would we do WinForms in 2024? Get into some of the principles about what we're looking for as we decide new features for .NET 9 and beyond, and give you some examples of how you can do modern development with WinForms. And throughout all this, we're going to be sprinkling demos of some of the coolest new things that you'll be able to use in .NET 9 and even in some earlier releases.
With some really cool surprises along, yes.
Really cool ones. So, WinForms in .NET, the first thing we're going to do about those surprises is talk about two of our most requested features. The first one is mine, and it is the DPI unaware designing. And basically, you and I may have different DPI scale factors that we might want to use on our systems. I like 150, Klaus likes 100% scaling. Unfortunately, every time you switch your scale factor, the coordinates are reserialized and recreated based on your current scaling. This causes some nasty problems in both the design time and the runtime. This animation shows a design time or a runtime perspective, where if you look at the size of that user control that was just displayed, it goes all the way down to quite a few more lines than what the other version of the application does. And that's because they're running and being designed at different scale factors. In 17.8, we introduced a way to resolve this, because in .NET Framework, the only thing you could do was restart Visual Studio altogether. And when you restarted Visual Studio in DPI unaware mode, what you ran into was all of Visual Studio being blurry and pixelated and just difficult to work with because it was all at 96 DPI. Now, with the DPI unaware tab that we've introduced, we can make the screen itself, just the design surface and nothing more, the DPI unaware. And everybody who's designing the application are all going to be designing in 96 DPI, no matter what their screen is set at for the rest of Visual Studio. This lets VS be nice and crisp while the screen is still at 96 DPI. So let me take a moment and show you what that looks like. So let's take a look at the DPI unaware design example that I've got for you. So I've opened up this project. It's been designed on my laptop where I was using 100% scaling. Today, I'm on my desktop and I needed it zoomed in a little more, so I set my DPI, my display scaling at 125%. And you might notice that right here at the top, we've got a little note. Now I'm going to come here and I'm going to get to my button, and I'm going to change the text to, how about changed text? What you would expect in a regular sort of operation is that the only characteristic on this entire form that changed was the text property of that button. But if I come over here to the Git changes and I compare the unmodified version of the form resx file, what you're going to see are dozens of changes. And these changes are each and every single text box on that form having to be resized and repositioned because my display is at 125% scaling. That is not what we're aiming for. I would like to be able to design a form, have it look the same way, no matter what machine I'm working and designing it on. So let me come back here, and I am going to just undo everything. I'm going to just get rid of my pending changes. I'm going to come over here and show you the feature that I'm talking about, which is this, starting the WinForms designer in DPI unaware mode. To do that, I'm going to go to my project properties, And I'm going to quickly add this new property, Force Designer DPI Unaware, and set it to true. Now, because I've got my form open, I'm really going to want to restart the server process because the design surface in Visual Studio is an entirely different process. The easiest way to restart that process is to unload the project and then reload the project with all of its dependencies. And once that reloads, the first thing we'll notice as I open up my form as it's starting, this is kind of the indicator that the design tool server process is started. You'll see up here that the process is set to, the project is set to open in WinForms DPI unaware mode. So let's go back here and I'm going to change the text property and say this is new text. And when I come back to my Git changes and I go look at my resource file, compare it with the unmodified version, what you're going to see is the only change on the entire form or on the entire resource file is that one button that I changed the text to. So that's because, again, I went to the project file and I added the Force Designer DPI Unaware tab. And this is a feature that I use constantly. And that's the Designer DPI Unaware tab. Klaus, you said you had something you wanted to show, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I just saw your color scheme that is your favorite one, right?
Pink, absolutely.
It's not exactly what I like, to be honest, but I have something I think that is more suited for developers. But let me just show what it is. I think it's just more impressive to show than to talk about. What I have here is your almost typical WinForms app, which we're starting now from within Visual Studio. And as you will see, this is probably the fourth gazillion task management WinForms app, and insofar it's surely nothing that special, at least not yet. This app, it got actually all your WinForms controls that we learned to love over those years, like the toolstrip menu here with its toolstrip menu items. With those I can manage my data, set my options, adjust the sorting of the task view. And then down here we got a group box, which contains controls to create new tasks. And of course, then the status strip showing things like the sort order, the project, or the selected task, current user, and then also the time and the current date. Pretty much everything you see here is purely WinForms stock. Even the task list, which looks maybe a little bit like the WPF grid view, but basically it's a usual 10, 15-year-old WinForms color scheme, which is, pun intended, very much in contrast to the Visual Studio window in the background. It's pretty bright. Let's stop the app for a second and find the program.cs file. And now let's go here and insert the statement application.set default dark mode. We choose dark mode .enabled. So, and now let's compile and run the app again. That looks different, doesn't it? There was just one line of code and we turned that thing design-wise completely around. Well, there's a bit more than one line of code to achieve some of the details here you see, but the important part is all the WinForms stock visual elements that are actually in dark mode. The menus, the status bar, most of the standard controls. So we can enable the dark mode for them just with that one additional line. We need to acknowledge, though, that with WinForms, we're dealing with a wrapper around a 25-year-old technology, which is the wrapper around the Windows Win32 controls. And unfortunately, we cannot have all of those controls dark mode themed. Exceptions are, for example, the calendar controls. But the important part is when it comes to list view, tree view, combo box, list box, all the controls which use scroll bars, those are themed correctly. And for certain details, like here with the rounded corners of the entry fields, there's always a bit of clever custom painting with which we can achieve what we need to style it a little bit more modern in no time. We have also always the option to use the amazing control suites of our third-party control vendors, because they are providing really state-of-the-art controls with amazing designs and theming options. Let's look a bit closer at the code and see how we can conceptualize this to work in .NET 9. So when I open IntelliSense here, we see we got a few options for those settings in the enum. Enabled and disabled, of course. I figure those options are pretty self-explaining. But then there is inherits, and that's kind of an ambient setting. Going forward with this approach, the same options you would then also find, well, on the controls new dark mode property. And since it's on control, pretty much every control will then also inherit that dark mode property. So application got the set default dark mode method, and the control class in .NET 9, let's see, has the dark mode property. So if the control dark mode settings defaults to inherits, it then inherits the dark mode setting from its parent, and that one again in turn from its grandparent, and so on until we reach the root form. And if the dark mode property then of that, like top level form is also set to inherits, then we're taking over from the setting of the applications object, and then finally from the system setting. The important part is we can break this chain at any point, if you will, and then take the settings over as we need the handling to be done in some specific app context. It's theming destiny, if you will. As I pointed out before, there are cases when we need to custom draw. Most professional WinForms line of business apps use, as I mentioned, third-party controls libraries from our control vendor partners. They are really doing an outstanding job in like the zeitgeist design, pretty quick rendering, and also theming. To be clear, and that's important, at this point we have no ambition for WinForms to go there and provide like a suite of new themed controls. There will be no full theming support from the Windows runtime. Third parties do that already, and they do a much better job. There are situations where we need custom rendering in the domain-specific area of an app, when it's about presenting your data of your application domain visually in a very special way, and that's where we are going to need that. So the text boxes you saw earlier are just one example of that. So while they are basically themed for dark, they're not coming with rounded rectangles out of the box. There's just a bit of custom painting going on here to achieve that. So when we're custom painting in a dark mode themed environment, there is a bit of manual customization needed, and for that we got two options. And let's take a look at that real quick. So the first is we define a concrete color palette for the specific mode, like here in our custom grid view control, and then depending on the actual control, that's what we're applying. Or we use the new option in .NET 9 to get the mapped system colors for the respective mode. And for that, we've put a themed version of the system color collection on application. In this case, the system color window text will then return black in light mode, and it will return white in dark mode. And with that, the selection rectangle, which we paint down here, will have in every mode the correct color. And then one more thing in this context, the rather rounded design of the text boxes or the grid view items are surely something which fits the modern and fluent design of apps pretty nicely. And that's why we added also a couple of new APIs on graphics. And as you can see here, a filled rounded rectangle is like one of them. Let me start the app for that again. Also, in terms of performance, we've done quite some work. So as you can see here, when I resize the window or scroll through the data, the app is rendering pretty quickly and behaves very responsive. That's it for now about the current state of our work for dark mode in .NET 9.
Oh man, Klaus, dark mode in WinForms. Who would have ever thought about it?
Yeah, it's also kind of cool that we can really customize it where we need it. But still, one thing I wanna address, and I think it's important, our vendors, our third-party control vendors can really do a good job with it. Well, we provide pretty much the infrastructure for doing it. We don't have any, big ambitions to, like modernize the controls itself, because I think that is something that the control vendors really should do.
Absolutely. Some of our third-party vendors have some really awesome theming capabilities. This is kind of just the introductory, hey, are we in dark mode or not? And some customizations.
All exactly. Right. And we should not forget, often it is like when we have domain-specific functionality that's also custom draw, then that is where this feature is really handy. So we can, account for the settings that we have right now. So
as we have been working on WinForms for the last few years, I keep hearing one question repeated over and over again. And that is, why would we use WinForms in 2024? I mean, WinForms has been around since, for more than 20 years now. And it is the most popular desktop UI stack that I think has ever been. That's in part because of how easy it is to quickly create an application, and in part because the designer makes it drag and drop simple. So why would I want to move to WinForms for .NET 9 and continue using it in 2024 instead of going to WPF or WinUI? First of all, rather than staying in .NET Framework, you'll probably want to move to WinForms .NET 9 because you'll be able to take advantage of the language improvements, the compiler enhancements that have happened. We've also been spending a lot of time in .NET as a whole working on security and performance gains. We can pick those up in WinForms in .NET 9 while still using that super popular desktop UI stack. And the control vendors that we talked about before, they're fully engaged and all in on WinForms and .NET 9, and they've got their really cool features brought forward for the modern era.
There's also one big point, and that is, if we take a look at how big certain WinForms app in the line of business space have become in the last 10, 15, 20 years, then it's often that we have like 5 million and up to 10 million lines of code. So it is just the thing that you cannot, from today to tomorrow, throw all that code out and then, write it completely new. But if you want to modernize, then you should, take bits and pieces and try to modernize those pieces. So that is why WinForms also need to go with the time, if you will.
Absolutely. You don't want to throw away 5 million lines of code and start over. You want to be able to modernize it bit by bit. My favorite part right now is the GitHub community. We've had a vibrant GitHub community since WinForms was introduced in .NET Core 3.0, and they've done a ton of work over the years. Now, I like to make sure that everybody has the same definition about what WinForms really is. And WinForms is a wrapper. It's a wrapper around the Windows APIs. We used to think of it as a wrapper around the Win32 APIs and common controls. And it is to a degree, but we're also kind of beyond that now. And we're a managed wrapper around any Windows native APIs. We make it as easy as possible. So things like the updated folder browser dialog, the task manager APIs that I'll show you in a minute, the new taskbar APIs where you can see progress in your taskbar icons. All of that is the kind of thing we can provide. And we're evolving along with Windows. So as Windows introduces new APIs, like the ability to detect dark mode, we're able to leverage them and bring them forward with us. When you see our demos, you'll see that we've got the rounded corners. We have a new default font from when we were in .NET Framework. You can see the difference. It's a little bit more spread out, and it's a little bit more crisp and easy to see. We also provided a way for you to go back to the old one if you need to have pixel perfect migrations. We've added the ability to be system aware by default, so it's much better on the high DPI screens. And with the incorporation of system.drawing into the WinForms repo and the ability to continually extend the APIs of system.drawing to incorporate the new ones. We've got modern stock icons and image like filters where it turns the image green or blue or black and white. Really some fun things that you can do with it.
And I want to add to that, that is not just for the sake of having those functionalities. First of all, they are provided because by the operating system, and again, we'll wrap around that. But secondly, if we want to modernize our apps, then we should also have the tools to address the modern design standard or the modern zeitgeist, if you will, for those kind of apps, for the fluent design. And those new functionality just helps a lot in exactly that context.
Yep. We'll show you some examples here in just a few minutes. Something I wanted to be just another example of where we're evolving with Windows and where we're evolving with the times is with accessibility. When WinForms was introduced way back with .NET Framework 1.0, we were originally created to use MSAA as our accessibility provider. And that gave access to things like narrator so that you could hear what was going on the screen. Starting in, I think it was Windows 8, they started moving on to an entirely new automation framework or infrastructure called UIA. And it's extended way beyond what MSAA has done. Tools, like I said, narrator, NVDA, eye tracking software, all sorts of assistive technology, and test automation, for example, use the UIA providers to be able to interact with your applications. So what we've done over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 releases, honestly, we've been working on it for years, is we've slowly migrated our internal usage away from MSAA and into the new UIA providers. That is super important if you want your applications to be able to be compatible or comply with different disability legislation requirements and compliance guidelines across the world. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the European acts around accessibility. It's an important piece that you want to make sure that as you're migrating and modernizing your apps, you take advantage of the UIA that we're providing and do things with the text pattern and expand collapse patterns, invoke patterns. There's everything that Windows says we're supposed to have now, we do provide for you.
And keep that accessibility topic a little bit in mind for the last big surprise that we want to share later.
All right, Klaus, why don't you talk about our community?
Well, yeah, our community. I mean, we can proudly say that we got a very active community, which have actually implemented a ton of features in the spirit, exactly in the spirit of what you mentioned earlier. So a couple of the bigger features were, we got the task dialog API, which adds a great benefit with a fully customizable message box. And it is spot on in the spirit of WinForms, Sid, since it's a really cool wrapper around a really great and useful Windows API. And the same counts for drag and drop, which enables the rendering of objects being dragged. But we have also a lot of engagement around improving the quality of our actual code base. enabling support for null reference types is one of those areas where the community really brought also in their expert knowledge, and those community members often have like the experience to actually do a job like that. And these are just the highlights. So if you want to get engaged here, by any means, go visit github.com/WinForms and see what you would like to do and how you can engage with us. So, and then there is visualbasic.net. Especially for the WinForms area, for the WinForms topic, it's still something that is very alive and kicking. And in fact, when we modernize things that Merrie mentioned before, like the default font, we have not forgotten about Visual Basic. So first of all, starting, I think it was with Visual Studio 17.9, we introduced a complete new front end for the application framework. And then also you should take a look at the typical way how Visual Basic handles the application events, because everything that were added for C# was like picked up for Visual Basic, but just in the Visual Basic style.
Now, as we start thinking about the future of WinForms and the different kinds of things that we want to be doing, we needed to center ourselves around a couple of key principles. First of all is that concept we mentioned, the two concepts we mentioned earlier, that we're a wrapper around Windows APIs, and we will add new exposed APIs as Windows adds new APIs. We're evolving with Windows, meaning we're trying to help you have the fluent UI type patterns if you want, and the accessible patterns if you want. Just a very key idea is that we're evolving along with the rest of the environment. We're community-driven features, so if we will prioritize features that the community is actively asking for and telling us, this is what I want in order to be able to upgrade my WinForms application to .NET. The code that we write, the new features that we implement, they all need to leverage the modern .NET features and current coding standards and all of that. And new features that Klaus and I are tossing back and forth and we'll be showing you here in just a second, all of them are there to help encourage the idea of modernization. WinForms is just one possible front end against a myriad of different backends, and we want you to be able to modernize that back end and still allow for that familiar, comfortable Windows Forms front end.
Yes, and we must also not forget one big aspect, and that is that the underlying operating system is evolving. And sometimes it is not that we want to modernize certain aspects of WinForms. We just have to, because otherwise we would run into problems. So if the Windows operating system is modernizing, then
we're along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Klaus, I know you're itching to show me some demos, so why don't we talk about modern data binding, thinking about that whole modernization concept with different types of data backends, but that WinForms classic front end.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a couple of questions that why would we innovate in the area of data binding? But we thought data binding is exactly what you addressed in the spirit of modernization. And the reason is that when you take a look at the XAML UI stacks, then there is data binding going on a lot in shape or form of a concept which is called MVVM. With that in mind, we had to come up with a couple of things that I want to show a demo for, and I think it's super important to keep that in mind, that this is really a great tool to modernize your WinForms apps, for the big WinForms apps, and then also have the ability to spin off a couple of parts of that into the modern world. And with that, let's look at the demo. You saw the app earlier, and you could there already assume that there was classical relational data involved. And in fact, like for so many WinForms apps, those data indeed came from a SQL Server instance. So a quick look into the Server Explorer here in Visual Studio shows us these here are our tables in the SQL Server, and we have the users, we have the projects, categories, and of course the tasks. And well, the stored data just looks like this. And then within our app, we're using Entity Framework Core in a dedicated data layer project to handle the data and to provide the CRUD operations for the different data types when the user requests those via the UI. Another app start here from VS, and let's see if our app is really working as expected. Putting on our testing hats here for a moment, let's look at our sorting commands here. We can sort by status, and we can sort by due date, and we can sort by, oops, nope, we cannot. We found a bug. And you know what? Shouldn't the sort mode appear also in the status bar? That's like yet another bug. But well, it's a WinForms app after all, right? The first one is probably some missing menu item click event handler, and the second bug is a toStrip label whose text property we're probably not setting correctly. So let's switch to the forms code behind file, find the events, and well, as you see here, here's the thing. There's not really anything here. Yes, we got initialize component. We have some data source assignment in form load going on, but that's pretty much it. And the reason is this app was recently modernized, not only visually, but also with regards to its general architecture. Now it completely separates the business logic from the user interface, and it does that by applying a pattern which is actually a well-known approach in the XAML-based UI stacks, and it's called MVVM, which is short for Model View View Model. WinForms does not support MVVM as well as all the XAML UI stacks like WPF, .NET MAUI, or WinUI do. But we know that a lot of businesses have incredibly large WinForms code bases, and they want to move certain parts of their apps on this new XAML UI stacks. But what we cannot ever forget is that teams cannot throw away their existing stuff. Sometimes WinForms apps have like 5 million lines of code and then write everything from scratch. That's for those teams simply not feasible. What we should do instead is identify domain-specific areas of a huge app for modernization, introduce a WinForms version of MVVM then as a first step, and with that part of your app also becomes unit testable, by the way, because we can rid of the WinForms dependencies in the business logic. And when those business topics have been moved and modernized, we can then either move that logic to another UI stack or complement what we have, for example, for a mobile app spin-off with MAUI, and effectively then run that part cross-platform on iOS, Android, and WinUI. So let's figure out how we do that in WinForms with a series of new features around binding that we've recently introduced to the WinForms runtime. You already got the first glimpse of the view model classes here, which contain the business logic for our task tamer app. The linchpin of that app is the main view model class, and that one is also controlling the pull-down menu commands and, of course, the status bar. So let's go and open that code. And just as a reminder, binding is not new to WinForms, and it always was pretty powerful from the beginning, starting with version 2.0. Don't reject the MVVM approach for modernization. Maybe you're thinking it is too much boiler code to write. In this app, you will see we're using the MVVM community toolkit, and you can just search for it in the interweb. It's available as a NuGet package. And with that, writing bindable properties and relay commands is really as quick as writing the equivalences in WinForms code behind. What you see here is the complete definition of the properties we need to fix our app with. Here we have a backing field called sort order. But because we attributed that one with observable property and the class is derived from observable object, the whole property is automatically code generated from that field. And the same goes for the relay command. We got a method, and that method accepts a string as a parameter. We're in practically new feature land for WinForms because you could never do anything with view model commands before. Let's go back to the designer for a second. Since the code is actually there, it's very likely we got the bugs because we simply forgot to bind those properties to our controls. Let's do the sort order first. Click the label here in the status bar, and mind you, that label is not a control. It is a toolstrip label, and that is a component. To make this work, we introduced to WinForms the bindable component class earlier and made some changes to the toolstrip item base classes. So every toolstrip label, button, menu item is now fully bindable. So for that label, let's find the text property to bind, and then let's find in our main view model data source, or binding source, I should say, the respective sort order property. That would be the fix for the status label. Here's how the command binding works. I mentioned the term relay command a couple of times before. So the method which is attributed with the relay command attribute gets view model internally assigned to a property of type iCommand, which the community toolkit automatically generates. You write the method, you attribute it with the relay command, and then the necessary property that becomes bindable will automatically be generated. And our toolstrip menu items on the other side are then inherited from bindable component, as I mentioned before, all have the command parameter property, so we can then bind those properties to the respective counterparts on the other side, like I'm going to do right now. Here, I can even define an additional parameter, in this case, the sorting type last modified, which is then automatically passed to the parameter of the relay command method, which we saw before. Fix is done. Let's quickly try this. And this is how we do that. So that's it for what is new in modernization of WinForms app through data binding and MVVM.
And Klaus, that was pretty impressive. You've put a lot of thought and ideas into how people can modernize the backend, leverage WinForms, unit test your business data and business logic, I should say, and even spin off, say, a mobile app to help do some data entry in the field.
Yes, I mean, those are the things that you can do, and it goes way beyond what we can actually demo in the short amount of time that we have. But it is exactly what you say. We can have spin-offs to other UI stacks, and unit testing is certainly one big part that this kind of architecture allows us to do.
So talking about the future and .NET 9, which will be releasing towards the end of this year in November, what are some of the things that we care about or are focusing on as the WinForms team? As it's been widely publicized, there's a big need for everybody to be improving their security. So anything that we do is around security first and foremost. And binary formatter, which really helps with serialization and is pretty well used in the WinForms designer. That's something that we have to deal with because it's inherently not a safe technology. So one of the big efforts, and it won't show up as pretty new features, but it will show up in the form of a removed binary formatter, a replaced modern in WinForms, a replaced modern safe architecture, a safe deserializer, and in all have your applications be much more secure. Some of the Windows desktop improvements you've already seen in demos, for example, the dark mode that Klaus showed us at the very beginning today. System.drawing, I kind of mentioned it, has image effects and format conversion now that you can do. Lonnie on our team is implementing the new taskbar APIs, which aren't so new to Windows, but they are for us, where you can actually show things like, progress bars on your taskbar icon, or stop, play, start buttons on your taskbar icons. And we're continuing in an iterative process to modernize the entire Windows Forms code base. Specifically, I think one of the exciting innovations that we've done internally is leveraged a project called CS-Win32, which has completely modernized our interop. So all of the COM interop that we have to do to talk with Windows, we've made that a very consistent process. And by doing that, that enables us to go pick up new APIs as Windows produces them and enable them for you. Two other things that we are working on is full COM wrappers to support OLE and accessibility. And we really are starting on the journey of creating a trimmable WinForms experience for you. There is a lot of reflection and binary formatter that happens by default, and we're working towards trying to work around those things so you can have a trimmable application and deploy just the bits you need.
Disclaimer though, there will be scenarios that probably won't ever be able to fully be trimmed. If too much reflection and too less type safety is going on, which we see in certain parts of WinForms apps, those areas are very hard to refactor. But we will have a compromise that is
pretty cool.
Most likely pretty cool, yeah.
So beyond .NET 9, what are the things that we're looking at? Continuing those trimming and AOT scenarios. Like I said, and like Klaus is alluding to, it's a journey. We've kicked off some initial activities with the runtime team, and we're working together to try to make that a reality for you. High DPI has been a long time problem space for WinForms because we were created in a pixel by pixel kind of layout. And when people do scaling and font increases and all of that, it just doesn't work the same way. The Visual Studio design time experience is critical for us. Because that's part of what makes WinForms WinForms, by dragging and dropping controls and text boxes and buttons, that's how you make the really quick and simple apps. So performance and reliability there, we've had to, re-architect the entire designer over the years, and we're catching some of those little corner cases that we didn't know before. We're also adding on to our extensibility support, with more APIs that if someone's doing, let's say, a third-party control vendor needs some different things exposed to create their own design environment, that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be continuing to invest in. And as I said, whatever Windows exposes to us, we will consider for including in WinForms. So you as the customer need to tell us what it is that you need in order to continue with us on our journey with WinForms. Klaus has been itching to show this one for quite a while. It's async computing with WinForms, because WinForms was designed on a single thread, the UI thread, only the UI thread, very synchronous manner. But that's just not how Windows works today. And it's not how anything really works today. So the next demo we're going to show you is using async from your WinForms application, and some of the things that we're adding to our APIs to make it easier for you to do async programming.
When WinForms 1.0 was released, we still had a very long way to go to finally enjoy the goodness of async and await. But WinForms actually was able to handle asynchronous scenario from day one. The problem was just nobody really used it because it was really awkward and tedious to do. and it was prone to errors. Well, that's water under the bridge. And these days we can actually do some pretty neat stuff. As you can see here, I use it to switch on the spinner, which is very reminiscent of the progress display of the Windows boot process, if you think about it. And that's for a reason. Because, little secret, there's a character font somewhere in your Windows folder which holds a series of characters which all resemble one part of that spinner frame or frames. So what this control here does is to take a label, set the font property to that special font, and then it displays the corresponding characters one after the other so that this animation effect is created, just like a flipbook. Now, the cool part here is that it is done completely asynchronously. And as you can see, I can move the window, scroll the list view, do all sorts of stuff. The spinner control just continues to run circles through its character set and is completely unimpressed by all the other things happening at the same time. But what's yet more interesting is how we put this together. So let's take a look at this spinner control, a look at its class definition to really prove that this control is in fact just inherited from label and does principally not much more than quickly switch out characters. Here is where it becomes really cool. For the actual trigger, which times the switch from character to character, we're using .NET's, I would say, comparable new periodic timer, which is completely designed for asynchronous use. And that one is working like this. We define the timer with a trigger time span in mind, and then we are entering a loop that we asynchronously wait for the timer just to pulse. Since this is done with an await, it's not a blocking operation. So of course, like every other awaitable method, the code runs on blocking and asynchronously. Now, we need, of course, then make sure that we can switch the spinning status off and on again. And for that, we're just using a cancellation token. Of course, we can only update our label when the underlying label was indeed created. Since the timer callback now comes on a different thread than the UI thread, we need to marshal the code so that it's getting executed on the UI thread. And normally we would do that with just an invoke. But here's the thing. Our method that updates the label returns also a task, so it is itself awaitable. And that's a problem which our new API can solve. This invoke async method that you see here, which is on control, does exactly that. And it is one of the new APIs around async support in WinForms, which we have on the roadmap for .NET 9. Those APIs are really necessary to have because more and more APIs WinForms actually needs to consume are awaitable. They are returning tasks, and often there isn't even like a synchronous equivalent anymore. Also because that simply would not make any sense. So this is just of many examples. The new Windows 11 APIs, which we can very easily directly use from WinForms, has way more additional examples for methods which really need async support. Like when it comes to reading sensors or reading bitmaps or images with one of the brand new formats. And there's so much more. So all brand new APIs need to be awaitable.
That was so cool, Klaus. Before we wrap up today, what I want to do is talk a little bit about Windows and what Microsoft is investing in when it comes to client development. I know it's been a while that it seems like there hasn't been investment, but when you look behind the scenes, on the Windows native side, we've got 𝗦𝗽𝗻𝗀 3, which is fabulous for really connecting with some of those high, really deep OS, GPS and other sort of hardware things that Windows provides. You've also got WinForms and our buddies over in WPF, which we really like working with. On cross-platform native, we've got .NET MAUI and React Native. There's also hybrid Blazor apps with WebView 2 controls, and PWA and Blazor Web for web-based development. So Microsoft really cares about making sure that you as the developer have whatever technology is best for you in developing solutions for your enterprise. Here is a list basically of the other sessions that you're going to be able to see here at Build this year. We have a couple of breakout sessions with our WinUI and WPF friends. There are other on-demand sessions, including elevating your craftsmanship with WinUI 3, building Blazor hybrid apps. There's us, and PWA Builder. It has some resources here as well. And kind of wrapping up, again, I want to just bring up some more resources. I've already shown you the GitHub repo. I've got links in here with different learn pages about building in WinForms around the DPI designer DPI on aware mode. A video that I did last year that was a lot of fun. WinForms at .NET Conf. You got to see a lot of the pre-.NET 9 features in that demo. And of course, we've got VB.net and a few links there and some resources with semantic kernel, because believe it or not, you can use ChatGPT or WinUI, or not WinUI, excuse me. You can use ChatGPT or the semantic kernel from your WinForms apps. As a matter of fact.
Okay, so for that last thing that we have, let me show one secret property of these controls that we have not spoken before. When you look closely, then we have here section in the properties grid, which has the category AI supported, and one property that's called Make It Intelligence. And so it's just for those both fields enable this property or these properties, and then start the app again. And now we know that we can, usually in a WinForms app, add normal data fields and texts into that. Well, I mean, this is the same here. So when I enter a date, that works pretty well, right? But what if we don't really know what the particular date is that we want to enter? So for example, I want to say that my due date is next Friday. So wouldn't it be nice if I could just enter here next Friday? And when I then press tab, then we have support and actually figure out that that next Friday is that exact date. So Merrie, what do you say? Do you want to try and see what you can do?
Sure. Can I do holidays?
Let's try holidays, sure.
All right, then I'm going to go with Boxing Day.
With Boxing Day. Okay, how do you spell that?
Boxing Day.
2 words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got an issue processing the results. The provided value Boxing Day is not a valid input type. But you know what? Let's make it a little bit more precise and provide a little bit more context. Maybe when we add Christmas here in parentheses, let's see what happens then. And now the AI could actually, based on that context, figure out what the context of Boxing Day here means. But this is not all. So we can, of course, try things like, tomorrow, which is really easy. But then I know there is a German word for the day after tomorrow. It's a certain term. And I always forget what the English meaning is. So in my case, because my first language is German, I could also go in here and say übermorgen, which is the day after tomorrow. And again, we have that.
Boom.
And like a couple of hours before, I asked the sister of my wife, who is visiting right now, and she is fluent in Romanian, what last year of the year means in Romanian. And we also tried that. So that is the 31st. Let's quickly go to the text. When we actually, like write the text for the tasks, then it's not big a deal when we just, have a text that is ready to go, nothing happens. But now, again, I'm not really native to English, so it can be that I, am in a hurry and I'm typing really quickly, and then maybe something like this comes up. Remind me of buying food for Aslan. Now, this is not really correct, right? But again,
It corrected that for you. How are you doing that, Klaus? This is too cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like in the background, we're using the semantic kernel here, and we just figured out a couple of good prompts where we're sending the data that we entered, and then we send it over. We let the AI do their job, and then we get it back. And we ask the AI in that case to prepare it in a certain format. And then if we get this format, then we can use it. And if we don't get this format, we just exclude that and say, hey, I'm sorry, we just showed a tooltip and that's it. And I just want to remind everyone, this is nothing special in terms of WinForms controls. So this is a text box basically, and it's using the spinner that I showed before in the async demo, and then it is just the normal, usual tooltip where we're showing the results. But there's nothing that is not WinForms native. And what I really think this means is that we can slowly adapt. And again, this is under the umbrella of modernization. Existing WinForms apps, I don't need to, like get rid of 5 million lines of code, but gradually there's really a good way to build in those features and then use them. And they're like a really good extension also with the mindset of accessibility, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So these aren't controls that we're providing today, but this is just to show us that we can basically create our own LLMs and our own code and use it straight from WinForms.
Exactly. And it is not really something that that needs to be provided. I mean, this is just a logic that is easily adaptable and can be incorporated in whatever you use. So this is really an add-on rather than something that needs to be replaced.
That is very cool, Klaus. Thank you for showing me AI in WinForms. I can't wait to see what we do with the new Copilot SDKs and other ways that we can also incorporate some of Microsoft's AI solutions.
Yes, this is really exciting times.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a lot of fun to show you kind of where WinForms is headed and the cool things that you can do. Enjoy the rest of your build.